Niall, what's in your notebook today?
Well, I had the day off from Rising yesterday, Robbie, and I put my time to rather dubious use. I went to the State Department to see President Biden deliver one of the final speeches of his presidency, this one dedicated to a defence of his foreign policy. The President insisted that thanks in part to those policies, the United States is winning the worldwide competition, as he put it. Biden defended the withdrawal from Afghanistan, his support for Ukraine, and how he had managed the US relationship with China. The President spoke for almost a half hour, but he took no questions. And that was a shame because I certainly have plenty, specifically about Israel and the Palestinians, and the moral stain that conflict has left on the Biden presidency. Now, I'll get to the news of the day in a moment, but first the big picture. Since the heinous Hamas attacks of October 7, 2023, in which around 1,200 Israelis were killed, Israel has laid waste to Gaza. More than 46,000 Palestinians have been killed, according to the local health ministry. Around 90% of the population has been displaced. The humanitarian situation, including dire shortages of food, shelter and sanitation, is by any reasonable standards a catastrophe. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, along with former Defence Minister Yoav Gallant, stands accused by the International Criminal Court of being a war criminal. This has all happened with the full support of the Biden administration, which provided almost $18 billion in military aid during the first year of the conflict alone. The President himself often cites his ironclad commitment to Israel. So, Biden says we are now finally on the brink of a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. We're pressing hard to close this, he said at the State Department yesterday. This is a story in flux. Right now, no deal has been announced. Maybe by the time you're watching, there will be one. So far, we know only the general, unconfirmed contours of a possible agreement. But there is one unexpected twist, and it's the suggestion that Donald Trump, of all people, might be due some credit for applying pressure to Netanyahu. That's surprising, coming from a president-elect whose threats that there will be hell to pay in the absence of a ceasefire deal had been seen as a threat toward Hamas and the broader Palestinian population. But let's look at the evidence. In Israel, a columnist for the Haaretz newspaper, Chaim Levinson, has just published a piece headlined, "Trump's Mideast envoy forced Netanyahu to accept a Gaza plan he repeatedly rejected." Levinson notes the aggressive role reportedly played by Trump Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff, and he also quotes the consternation of Netanyahu's supporters. One Netanyahu booster lamented of Trump, "All his people have been lying. It's a big disappointment." Another contends, quote, "The pressure Trump is exerting right now is not the kind Israel expected from him." Now, our regular Rising audience knows I have many criticisms of Donald Trump. But if he is putting pressure on Netanyahu to sign up to a ceasefire deal and making the kind of concessions Netanyahu had previously resisted, good for him. If, and I stress if that is the case, it's another ignominious moment for Biden. The outgoing president has failed to check Netanyahu in any meaningful way, as the bodies have piled up on a scale scarcely imaginable. Indeed, Biden's record has truly scandalous elements. Just this past weekend, CBS's 60 Minutes, to its credit, carried an explosive report featuring interviews with former State Department officials who resigned, largely over Biden's Israel policy. One said she was berated for daring to present images showing children that were starving to death, an outrage in which she believed the Biden administration was complicit. Another said there was, quote, "no debate or discussion over Israeli requests for weapons transfers." And a third was asked by CBS's Cecilia Vega whether Biden really had any red lines over Israel's conduct. Let's listen to some of that.
What's the message the U.S. has sent to the Netanyahu government?
I believe the message that Prime Minister Netanyahu received is that he was the one in the driver's seat, and he was controlling this.
Biden will be out the door in less than a week, but the worst elements of his Israel policy won't be forgotten. This doesn't mean that Trump will be consistently better or will worry overmuch about the right of the Palestinians, but let's give some credit where it's due. In diplomacy, even small things matter. That Haaretz column I mentioned earlier opened with an anecdote. It told of how Trump's envoy last Friday informed aides to Netanyahu that he would be arriving in Israel the following day. Those aides reportedly told Witkoff, who is incidentally Jewish, that the Israeli Prime Minister would not meet him until Shabbat was over. According to Haaretz, quote, Witkoff's blunt reaction took them by surprise. He explained to them in salty English that Shabbat was of no interest to him. Netanyahu took the meeting without delay. It all recalls a famous moment from a generation ago. Back in 1996, then President Bill Clinton met Netanyahu for the first time. Afterwards, Clinton's reaction was widely reported as follows, quote, who the F does he think he is? Who's the effing superpower here? Now, I don't have much faith in Donald Trump having any enduring principles, but if he or his envoy remind Mr. Netanyahu who the superpower is, they'll have at least done something. Something that President Biden, the self-proclaimed champion of human rights, has failed so shamefully to do at all.
Yeah, I'm glad to see you acknowledge it, although I'm not at all surprised because you're a very fair-minded person, that it looks like very speculative. We don't know for sure. A deal has not been reached, but what we're hearing is that Donald Trump's representatives did exert some pressure on Netanyahu's government to agree to a deal that he previously did not want and that his more conservative coalition partners absolutely oppose. That is good because this, as you point out, needs to come to an end. It's just a horrific massacre of thousands of innocent people. It's awful. Many of the American people are scandalized by it and don't want to participate in it. And Donald Trump, for all his bluster on a variety of subjects, has never been an interventionist nation builder, has been very critical of neoconservatives, has been ironclad in his support for Israel's right to exist, but made comments that he wanted this ended because he doesn't think it's good. And he has, if this is true and accurate, he has done what most other presidents, Republican and Democrat, were willing to do previously, which is draw certain support for Israel, a right to defend itself, right to retaliate against terrorist groups, but up to a point at which we're not having World War III and you have to back down from there. Every president has done that except Joe Biden.
Yeah, which is extraordinary. And if you look at the coverage in the Israeli media, it is striking how much of it is about the pressure that they believe has been placed on their side by Trump. Now, I mentioned in my notes there that I'm critical of Trump in all sorts of ways, as you're well aware. But that element of bringing some pressure to bear has been really amazingly lacking during Biden's conduct or policy during this whole disaster. And I think it has been really to everyone's detriment, including, I might add, the sort of global position of Israel, which has been absolutely lambasted for understandable reasons because it has been such a brutal and prolonged assault.
Yeah, I agree. And also the standing of the U.S., it seems hard to reach a conclusion other than President Biden was not properly respected or feared or did not draw those lines with allies and adversaries. That raises questions about the cognitive fitness. Is it in conversations he seems like a man you can cross because maybe he's not all there at all times? There's some really consequential foreign policy that is in the domain of the executive, that this is not necessarily something you outsource to the rest of the team. His advisors are taking his cues, and we've had this policy that there's commonality between right and left in agreeing that it was just giving Israel a total free hand to destroy the entire Gaza Strip was catastrophically inhumane, or whatever way you want to describe it. And so I'm truly glad, if it's coming to an end, that will include the release of the hostages, which is essential, and we very much hope to see that.
For sure.
Up next, Trump's choice for Secretary of Defense is defending himself before Congress. That's Pete Hegseth. We will look at those hearings.